All right, welcome to episode 101 of Rockford Reading Daily. We are on chapter 7 of High Risers. This chapter is entitled Concentration Effects. Kelvin Cannon. Just as Bo John had predicted when recruiting Kelvin Cannon and the other middle schoolers behind Schiller, the gangster disciples took over much of Cabrini Green. The GDs presided in the white high-rises, the row houses, and all but a handful of the red towers. Kelvin grew with the gang. He was dedicated, and he paid attention. He studied what he needed to do to be a leader. Quote, to be aware is to be alive, end quote, he'd say. Standing outside 714 West Division, he noticed a car creeping past, the passenger sneaking looks at him and his friends. He shepherded everyone inside, and they'd already be on an upper floor when the car turned up Division to ride up on them. They called him, quote, righteous folks, end quote. He didn't present himself as a wild gangbanger. He didn't hurt people for no reason or sneak up on them with guns on guys. He was someone who'd take up a collection when a fellow disciple was hurt or killed. Cannon was on the Cooley High baseball team, pitching, catching, and playing left field. After a brawl at the school, he was called into the office. He claimed innocence, challenging a police officer to search him for weapons. He'd forgotten about the reefer he had hidden inside his hat, and he was expelled. Cannon had broken 100 rules for fighting and weapons and drugs, but he never before been caught like that, so the punishment seemed unjust. Still, he had to accept that he slipped up. Quote, what goes around comes around, end quote, he reasoned. When Cannon was 16, two of his friends told him they were going to rob an older woman who was selling drugs out of her third-floor apartment in Dolores Wilson's building. The woman had moved to 1230 North Burling from the south side, and she and her sons were believed to be Blackstone Rangers. Quote, they were like opposition to our organization, end quote, Cannon said. Quote, another gang comes into your territory, tries to set up shop, you know the repercussions. You got to shut them down, end quote. He and his friends entered the next door building. Cannon hid on the ramp as the other two knocked on the woman's door, saying they were there to buy weed. When the door opened, they pulled out guns and called for Cannon to join them. He saw 3 women seated on a couch, all of them his mother's age. Rifling through the kitchen and bedrooms, he bagged up whatever drugs and money he found, and they left. Except for a shot fired that didn't hit anyone, the robbery was unremarkable, one incident among many. Cannon might not have remembered it if it hadn't come back on him. A couple of weeks later, he was at the county jail on an unrelated gun possession charge when he saw his cousin Greg across the bullpen. Greg, it turned out, was in there for robbery in the Burling building. They were first cousins, and someone had fingered Greg for the crime, mistaking the two of them. When Greg realized the mix-up, he told the police. In an interrogation room, a cop said to Cannon, quote, we got your cousin. He said you could clear him and tell him who else was, quote, we got your cousin. He said you could clear him and tell us who else was involved, end quote. Cannon couldn't inform on his friends. That would be a violation of the disciples' code. Greg shouldn't have said anything either. Quote, that's not being an honorable disciple, end quote, Cannon would say. But he couldn't hold a grudge against family. Greg later went to the penitentiary on a 30-year sentence for 10 robberies he committed in Chicago and Michigan. Cannon tried to fight his own case in court. By the time a judge ruled on it, nearly 2 years later, Jane Byrne was living at Cabrini Green, and the city was making an example of anyone arrested there. Cannon was 18 then, a father, and charged with an adult home invasion and armed robbery. It was his first conviction, and he was given 7 years, of which he'd have to serve at least 3.5. At Stateville, a bunch of guys from Cabrini worked in the kitchen, and they helped Cannon land a job there as well. As he delivered food, he got to know the disciples' leadership, the board members, and they took note of how Cannon carried himself. He was mature and smart, keeping himself busy, never boasting about what he'd done or who he knew. They pointed out to Cannon that he had an out date. Many of them didn't, and they told him he had no business in prison, that he needed to go home and take care of his family, raise his newborn son. Cannon's father would visit, and they prayed together that Cannon would come to lead a truly righteous life. Quote, prison made me a better person, end quote, Cannon would say. Quote, I was so wild back then. I had no regard for other people. I was going to get killed or be in the penitentiary the rest of my life. You listen to the old timers, as a daily thing, how they lost their life in prison. They were trying to save me, end quote. Cannon became friends with Johnny Veal, who was in his second decade of a 100 to 199 year sentence for his part in the 1970 slaying of Sergeant James Severin and Officer Anthony Rosado. Veal was Cobra Stones, but he told Cannon that inside the prison they both rode Cabrini. The black community from the near north side could feel like a small town, everyone bunched together on an island of a few blocks and parceled into a handful of neighborhood schools. All around them were wealthier and wider communities, cutting them off from the black neighborhoods to the south and west. Everyone knew one another's families, if not each other personally. You're a McNeil, right? A Brown? One of the Campbells? Them Marlowe's people? Veal explained that this was also the meaning of Cabrini Green. They were from the same village, and the guys in the joint from Cabrini, whether they were disciples, Cobra Stones, or vice lords, represented their neighborhood. Quote, he taught me never to forget my roots, end quote, Cannon remembered. Quote, he was schooling me, telling me not to tear down Cabrini Green, but to help build it up, end quote. I think one of the things that stands out to me there is the fact that they spoke about that once the mayor was living inside of Cabrini Green, that the judges wanted to make examples out of the people who were arrested at Cabrini Green. And that just goes to some of the points that were being made in the previous chapters when people were speaking about the negative effects that were existing from the mayor living there. I think one of the other things that stands out to me is Kelvin Cannon speaking of how he believed that prison changed him or prison saved his life. And that's a sentiment you hear from people who've been inside of prison pretty regularly. And I think that what has to begin to happen is we have to challenge what it is that actually saved these people's lives. For every person who would say that their life was saved by prison or their life was changed by prison, I would challenge them to challenge them in asking if there was not alternative ways that your life could have been changed or that your life could have been saved. I would challenge them by saying, if he spent 3 years inside of prison, how did those 3 years affect his child and the mother of his children, and how did that affect his father and his other family? That I believe that there are a lot of people who go into prison and come out of prison and they're changed and their lives have been changed. But I don't think that prison is the only way to change somebody's life, because part of that changing is also with traumatization, whether they realize that or not, or whether they can acknowledge that or not. There is a psychological damage that goes on with being in prison, both for the person that is in prison and for the people who are outside dealing with that person being in prison. Even when the Cabrini Green high-rises were new, in the 1950s and 1960s, the first residents already talked about their home as being doomed. Quote, we're living on a gold mine, end quote, Hubert Wilson had always told his family. Cabrini was a mistake, and the city wouldn't allow a black settlement to remain so close to downtown and the Gold Coast. People spoke of the secret plans hatched by realtors and government officials, seeing signs of their forced removal all around them. Then in 1973, the city, along with downtown real estate and business interests, published, quote, Chicago 21, end quote, a comprehensive development plan to reverse 2 decades of economic decline and flight to the suburbs. Quote, the central communities must be revitalized to again become desirable both for living and for working, end quote, the report stated. Quote, they must be efficient, economic, and secure, and they must also provide maximum opportunity for human fulfillment, end quote. 11 centrally located communities, including Cabrini Green, were targeted for reinvention and resettlement. To survive, the city had to rebuild its tax base. The poor, black and brown people who currently sought human fulfillment in these areas believed that their homes would be taken from them, remade, and given to wealthier newcomers who were themselves considered more desirable. The Cabrini Green activist Marion Stamps helped from the coalition to stop Chicago 21, and the citywide alliance of blacks, Latinos, and working-class whites was one of the groups that got behind the first mayoral run of Harold Washington in 1979 and then organized for him more systematically during the 1983 election. Washington had been a precinct captain on the South Side, a position passed down to him from his father. He rose up in Daley's Democratic machine, serving in the Illinois House and Senate, and he won a seat in the U.S. House of Representatives in 1980. But Washington showed flashes of independence that put him at odds with the party's stalwarts. He split with Daley over police abuse in the black community, demanding that the city create an independent review board to investigate cases of brutality and misconduct. A preternaturally gifted orator, Washington could sound like he was performing Shakespeare, a Falstaff with a large, round face creasing into a smile, even as he was telling an opponent to drop dead. Quote, the term patronage, like his close cousin, paternalism, comes from the Latin pater, meaning father, end quote. He announced to a crowd in 1980. Quote, every citizen pays for the patronage system in poor city services and poorly constructed facilities. We pay for it when city government puts big business and downtown interests before the needs of average citizens. But my community, Black Chicago, suffers most deeply, end quote. In the summer of 1982, African Americans boycotted a Grant Park music festival called Chicago Fest after Mayor Byrne cut black representation on various city boards and commissions. Coming near the end of Byrne's first term, the protest was a surprising success. Stevie Wonder, set to perform, canceled, as did dozens of other acts. Suddenly, there was a coordinated effort to sign up unregistered black voters in the city. People were registered at libraries and churches, at welfare offices and grocery stores, and in public housing. Marion Stamps helped lead the voter drive on the near north side, and Dolores Wilson walked her high-rise, signing up her neighbors. Citywide, more than 130,000 people were added to the rolls, with most of them coming from predominantly black precincts. Quote, I'm running to end James Byrne's 4-year effort to further institutionalize racial discrimination in this great city, end quote, Washington announced, folding Byrne into his critiques of President Reagan's urban austerity measures. During the speech in which he declared his candidacy, Stamps interrupted Washington, yelling, quote, Harold, you are like the second coming, end quote. Stamps ran for alderman of her ward, and when Washington campaigned at Cabrini Green alongside her, thousands of people flocked around them. Ed Vrdoilak, a councilman from the city's industrial southeast side, tried to motivate Byrne supporters by feeding on their dread of a racial takeover. African Americans now made up 40% of Chicago's population. Quote, it's a racial thing, end quote, Vrdoilak said. Quote, I'm calling on you to save your city, to save your precinct. We're fighting to keep the city the way it is, end quote. Only a handful of white politicians and very few of the city's media outlets endorsed Washington. When asked whether her support of a black candidate wasn't the flip side of the same Chicago racism, Stamps rejected the idea. Quote, they have tried to keep us for so long not being proud of our own, end quote, she said. Quote, and I'm saying, feel good about yourself and vote for one that is part of you. Harold Washington is blood of our blood. We don't have to apologize about that. He is the father of our fathers and the son of our sons, end quote. Stamps lost her bid to the neighborhood's longtime incumbent, Burt Natteras. But with the record turnout in black precincts, Washington won the Democratic primary as Byrne and Richard M. Daley, the Cook County State's attorney and son of the former mayor, effectively split the white vote. Daley endorsed Washington in the general election, even as many whites in Democratic Chicago chose race over party. Washington's Republican opponent campaigned with the slogan, quote, Epton for mayor before it's too late, end quote. Out of a total of 1.3 million votes cast, Washington won by fewer than 50,000, becoming the city's first black mayor. The attacks on his administration began immediately. Vrdoilak's coalition of 29 white aldermen halted almost all activity in the 50-member city council. Washington was able to cut the budget by trimming the number of city workers, and he signed on to the Shackman decrees, which made it illegal to hire or fire city employees based on political expediency. But most of his attempts at reforms, or even at appointing board members to the various city departments were blocked. Every council meeting was a battle of insults and innuendo. Not all the, quote, Vordelik 29, end quote, were outright racist, but some were. Quote, scurrilous hooligans, end quote, the Grandelic mayor called his foes. The stalemate came to be known as the, quote, council wars, end quote. Under a black mayor, with the black head of the CHA and a black police chief, troubles in public housing persisted. The CHA was crippled by debt. During the Reagan years, the HUD budget was cut by 75%, while money from rents continued to dry up, and the CHA desperately needed to upgrade its aging and poorly maintained properties. At Cabrini Green, bedroom ceilings leaked, sinks and tubs didn't work, windows wouldn't close, and apartments lacked refrigerators or stoves. The CHA was already performing a kind of triage. It spent almost a tenth of its annual budget of $146 million on elevator repairs alone. Another $44 million was needed for asbestos removal and $750 million over 5 years for the repair of its 1,300 buildings. Washington picked Reynolds Robinson to write the tottering agency. Robinson had helped found the African American Patrolmen's League, a group created to challenge racism within the Chicago Police Department's own ranks. But as the chairman of the CHA, he warred with the agency's executive director, leading to deadlock. He fired dozens of elevator repairmen after an investigation news team showed them loafing on the job, but did so before finding replacements. Residents in the high-risers were relegated to the stairs. A tenant on her way to the hospital had to walk down 10 flights. She collapsed and died. Robinson abruptly dismissed 260 plumbers, pipe fitters, glaziers, and electricians for not doing, quote, a full day's work for a full day's pay, end quote. With an understaffed maintenance crew and amid a brutal winter, however, the boilers broke, buildings went without heat, and pipes froze and burst. The CHA was forced to rehire the crafts workers and pay them $400,000 in damages. Marion Stamps called for a rent strike at Cabrini Green, demanding that the Washington administration do something about the insufferable Marion Stamps called for a rent strike at Cabrini Green, demanding that the Washington administration do something about the insufferable conditions. By Washington's third year in office, his housing agency was running an $8 million annual deficit. The CHA lost out on $7 million in federal funds because it missed the grant deadline. Quote, the CHA was systematically ignored and raped, end quote, Washington told 100 residents at 1230 North Burleigh. He listed the mayors who preceded him, saying that they, quote, didn't fix the elevators, they didn't fix the trash chutes, they didn't give you police protection, they didn't give you a damn thing, end quote. Washington said, quote, I didn't build the CHA. Had I been mayor 25 years ago, this mess never would have been created, end quote. I think one of the things that stands out in that passage is the difficulty that it is and it will be, and it has been, it is, and it will be in the future of trying to right the wrongs that have been done historically to black people, to brown people, and to working class and poor communities. We're so deep in the hole when it comes to miseducation, when it comes to living conditions, when it comes to employment opportunities, when it comes to racial discrimination, that you can't, even if tomorrow you elected all black and brown mayors, all black and brown members of Senate, all black and brown members of House of Representatives, a black or brown president and vice president, and if these people also not just being this color, not just being a minority, but also had what was best for minorities at the head of their planning, or at the head of their it's a specific word I'm looking at the head of their platforms, they wouldn't be able to transform anything overnight. They wouldn't be able to transform anything in one election period or one one period of serving. It would be something that would have to gradually change because we didn't get here overnight. These conditions didn't pop up one day. They happen gradually and they happen over time. And so just like he said, as we've been reading through this whole book, all of the things that the CHA has been doing wrong, all of the things, all the neglect that the CHA has been doing, all of the discrimination and the racism that was existing in the CHA and existing in Chicago, electing one black mayor for a 4-year term, he wasn't going to be able to fix those things and to change all of those things in a 4-year term. And a lot of times when you're dealing with these type of issues, sometimes you have to, in the effort of trying to take steps forward, you're still taking steps back, or you're still taking steps to the side, which is one of the things that we've talked about historically, black people and brown people and working class and poor people dealing with, that when they get 2 steps forward, it's usually followed by another 4 steps back. And so I think that that's one of the things that we have to be cognizant of as we're advocating for an end to police terrorism, an end to mass incarceration, an end to racial injustice, that struggling against those things does not mean that there is some magical solution that will come in overnight and everything will be better. It was a process to get to this point, and it'll be a process to try to get to a different point. And so I think that that's one of the things that has to be emphasized, so that way we're not operating under false pretenses, thinking that just putting somebody black in office or putting more black people in positions of power will overnight change the conditions and the things that black people deal with. Even if these are people who have black people and poor people and working class people at the top of their agenda, it will still take time to reverse hundreds of years of racism, of discrimination. The idea of tearing down the high-rises, previously considered politically and logistically untenable, began to be floated as a thought experiment with greater frequency. The chief financial officer at the CHA mentioned to reporters that the agency might have to sell off its well-located properties just to pay its bills. Renault Robinson let it be known that the developers called him frequently to express interest in buying Cabrini Green. One group of realtors took him out to lunch and offered $100 million for a clear title to the near North Side development. Quote, "The sale would remove what has become one of the most crime-plagued, socially unacceptable public housing projects in the country, and it would pave the way for one of the most positive residential real estate developments in the city," end quote, said Alderman Ed Burke, the other ringleader of the Vroladak 29. Alderman Ateris, an ally of Washington's, sent the mayor a worn copy of a letter he'd written to Richard J. Daley in 1972 that opened with the line, quote, "As you know, the situation at Cabrini Green continues to be precarious," end quote. He began his letter to Washington the same way, emphasizing that little had changed in more than a decade. Quote, "The repeated incidents of sniper fire have occurred in every administration in which I have served as a public official," end quote, he wrote. He proposed a possible solution. Quote, "It is not inconceivable that 3-story walk-up units could be built within the open spaces of Cabrini Green, and that as soon as these units are completed for occupancy, steps could be initiated to demolish the high-rise buildings," end quote. The suggestions resulted as well from the dramatic changes to the area surrounding Cabrini Green. By the 1980s, the revitalization of the central communities detailed in the Chicago 21 plan has started to come to pass. The anti-urban impulse that has sent middle-class families fleeing to the suburbs had reversed itself, and young professionals, the decade's yuppies, wanted to live not in the all-residential bedroom communities of their parents, but in city centers near their jobs and one another. One of the first new developments to be built alongside Cabrini Green was Atrium Village. The property bordering the L tracks there had been vacant for almost a decade, and the city's Department of Urban Renewal was happy to give it away. In 1978, an alliance of 4 local churches partnered with the developer to build a 307-unit complex of townhomes and geodesic high-rises, each of them facing inward and creating a kind of fortress. Atrium Village was a racially diverse, mixed-income development with quotas for the numbers of renters receiving heavy federal subsidies. Jesse White moved into an apartment there, and Dolores Wilson served on Atrium's board. The churches conceived of Atrium Village as a bridge between Cabrini and the Gold Coast, a step up out of public housing. But more people ventured across the bridge from the other side. The market rate units were snapped up, ushering in a building boom. From 1979 to 1986, the communities around Cabrini Green experienced $900 million in new construction or upgrades. Just to the south of the row houses, on the other side of Chicago Avenue, fluttering banners proclaimed a new creative community called River North, chock full of renovated lofts, restaurants, and office space. To the north, townhouses along Larrabee now fringed the Cabrini development. In 1979, Waller High was transformed into the new Lincoln Park High School with a revised curriculum, a refurbished building, and money for a band and a chorus. The principal was permitted to recruit high-performing students from out of district, and the student body fell from over 90% black to 50%. At the same time that the Tribune was publishing a 29-part series entitled, quote, The American Millstone, end quote, focused on, quote, an underclass that is mostly black and poor and hopelessly trapped in the urban centers of Chicago, end quote. The city was also being celebrated for its, quote, urban renaissance, end quote. A 1986 feature on the near north side noted that, quote, new boutiques and rehab departments are closing in on one of the country's most spectacular examples of failed public housing, Cabrini Green, end quote. Cabrini was becoming an island of black abject poverty amid a sea of encroaching white affluence. Okay, and we're about at 30 minutes here, and we're not going to be able to finish this chapter in this reading, so I'm going to stop us here. And I think the thing that stands out to me the most about the passage we just read is the fact that we read earlier how once when Cabrini Green was built and more black people were beginning to live in that area, how they took away resources from the schools, how they got rid of the internships that was in the school, and how the school began to be overpacked with students. And we're reading now, once this gentrification of the area was beginning, or the urban renewal, in quotations, that was beginning to happen, that as they were having more white people living in this area, that they gave resources to the school in the area, that they invested in the school in the area again. But at the same time that they did that, they began to recruit kids from outside of the area to go to the school. And then the demographic of black people that attended the school went from 90% to 50%. And that is, it's not a coincidence. And that's one of the things that has to be pointed out when we begin to speak about the existence of black people in this society, the existence of poor people, working class people, minorities of all kinds, people of all colors, of all kinds in this society, is that when black people and brown people, working class people, poor people are asking for resources, they're regularly denied those resources. And when white people or middle class people or rich people are asking for those same kind of resources, they are regularly given those resources. And the biggest issue with that, besides the fact that it is a hypocrisy, is the fact that the people who need those resources for survival, who need those resources to pull themselves out of the situations that they are in, are the poor people, are the black people, are the working class people, are the people of color. And the people who are getting those resources and are and it's not changing their situation, it's just and it's not changing their situation, are the middle class people, are the white people, are the upper class people. And so I think that's something that's something that has to be articulated and expounded upon, and so we're going to end this episode here. Thank you for tuning in to Rockford Reading Daily. I want to encourage people to go back and listen to other episodes of Rockford Reading Daily. We put these episodes out on a daily basis to provide people the opportunity to begin and to further their journey in the struggle to end police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice. And again, we're reading High Rises by Ben Austin, and all of these books are being read to try to form a bigger picture in the form of curriculum for educating and informing people about these issues and how we can find ways to deal with these issues. We began by reading Mumia Abu-Jamal's Have Black Lives Ever Mattered? Then we read Race Matters by Cornel West. After that, we read Citizens, Cops, and Power by Steve Herbert. That was followed up by reading an essay on civil disobedience by Henry Thoreau. That was followed by Women, Race, and Class by Angela Y. Davis. We followed that up by reading Letter from Birmingham Jail by Martin Luther King Jr. And now we are reading High Risers by Ben Austin. And again, each one of these things are forming a curriculum of curriculum for struggle. All right, so see you tomorrow, or talk to you tomorrow. Share this on whatever platform you're listening to it on.